Okay, I put a comment on one of my last videos saying to put in questions, and I decided I would answer them all in one video because not everything needs a super drawn out video, I reckon. I have a tendency for trailing on, so maybe having to answer more than one will shorten it. And then put in the comments of this one the questions you want answered for the next one. That seems like an enjoyable way to do it for me and very sustainable and limits the amount of thought I have to put into what to talk about. So kind of going through a couple of questions that I got. The first one was just shoulder mobility for the low bar squat, right? I'm going to recommend you take a very, very hard look at your T-spine mobility before you start really paying too much attention to your shoulders. You're basically, if you're hunched over at the T-spine, you're unable to extend through your T-spine, you are going to have to put your shoulder into a lot more external rotation to get the bar into a low bar position. So rather than ask for all that extra from your shoulder, I would really hash out your T-spine. I think that's one of the best things you could do with a roller. I don't think foam rolling is always the best use of time, but I think that's one really good use for the roller is as an external implement for mobilizing your T-spine. Past that, the PVC pipe shoulder dislocations, you go this way, before you squat, go a long way. You can also take the PVC pipe, run it behind here, grab it here, and do some external rotation stretching. So I'd say that's probably the best bang for your buck is taking a look at your T-spine first, and then going through some shit with a PVC pipe. More often than not, that'll fix, and if it doesn't fix it, it's probably a skill thing. You probably are just in the habit of bearing too much load in your hands in your low bar position when your hands should really be clamping down there for stabilization rather than supporting any load. So fiddling with your grip and your bar position would be the next choice. So then I got two questions asking about deloads. Dude who asked me for the deload and then followed up with the bitchy comment on my second one. I'm gonna assume you didn't mean anything by it, but give me more than 2 days to answer your question. I have other shit that I do and I don't make a dollar off of this, so chill with that. Also, your name is Natty Lifter. If you're that dude who called Max a liar about being natty, you're a bitch. If not, carry on. So two questions about deloading, right? Basically how, when, and basically why. This is a complicated one because it varies based on your intention of training. I have a pretty simplified view on it that I think works very well, especially for kind of conceptualizing it if you're newer to programming, right? In my opinion, you kind of have two ways to structure your program, right? You have kind of the way that like Josh Bryant and Chad Wesley Smith structure it, where you have like 3 or 4 weeks of ramping training, and you ramp up past the amount you can recover from, right? And then you deload and hope you get a super compensation effect, right? So there's a total amount of workload that you can do and still recover from on a week-to-week basis. So a sustainable training load, the idea is you ramp up past the sustainable training load. You're basically in a accumulated fatigue state, and then you deload to get rid of all of that fatigue. That might take a whole week to decay all of that fatigue and get the super compensation that you're looking for. That you really do want to dial back quite a bit. I think a week can work pretty well. I've heard people say like so far as to you want to drop back your loading to like 50%, you want to drop back your volume to 50%, but you want to keep your frequency the same. I heard someone explain that as the difference between a pivot week and a deload. They said deload is the thing you do right before a meet. A pivot week is that you dial back both of those variables to decay fatigue, but you're not changing your training frequency. That is what I think most people should do regularly in their program is have pivot weeks, not necessarily full-on, full-fledged deloads where you're going to drop back your frequency as well. And then the other way to kind of structure your program is to try to train right below not right below, a degree below what you can recover from on a weekly basis and never overreach past that. So you would never need to plan a deload ahead of time, right? So basically you have like, okay, I'm going to intentionally overreach and I know I'll have to deload the next week. The other one is more reactive. That is when I accidentally went past what I can recover. Like I'll notice the symptoms of like I've accumulated too much fatigue, even though I'm trying to train right below from what I can recover from. I'll notice I've accumulated too much fatigue, and then that's more of like an emergency deload, right? You probably haven't overreached by as much as the guy who did it on purpose, right? So the week-long deload might not be necessary. I find, especially for smaller guys, more newer guys, a 3 to 4 day deload can be plenty sufficient to get rid of that unwanted fatigue accumulation that you kind of did on accident. Looking at the same thing, I wouldn't even dial back necessarily the frequency of loading. I would just dial back the load and the intensity to like 50% just for a couple of days to get back on track, and then you resume your more linear programming style. I would say that those are all general recommendations, and you just need to find for yourself how long it takes to decay that fatigue. Because if you decay your fatigue in 3 days, there's absolutely no reason you should be taking a full 7. You're just wasting potential time to get stronger, right? And I think some people who needlessly take deloads too often, if you're deloading every 4th week and you didn't overaccumulate fatigue, you're wasting a 4th of your year of training. That is kind of ridiculous. So, taking a hard look at how long do I really need before I'm back to where I want to be, and not doing more than that for the sake of doing more than that, but also not doing less than that so we're not getting the effect we want. Same thing, you can take a look and say, okay, 50% of the volume for 50% of the intensity, I feel like I could do a little bit more and stay moving and still decay my fatigue. Or that might be too much if you're really, really fucking strong, right? So there is some degree of trial and error, right? You need to have some agency, and I can't just give you a magical number per se, because just simply the load you're lifting and where you are in your career and what weight class you are, and like whether you're a man or you're a woman, all have big impacts on how that might work. So at the end of the day, you do need to do some trial and error. So I would probably follow those guidelines the first time. Take some notes. Literally writing stuff down in a notebook can be very, very helpful for some people, just so you really dial in your own process, because becoming a better lifter largely just comes down to dialing in your own personal process. Yeah, I forgot one. There was also one question just about how dynamic squat warm-ups might look. Basically, you will want your warm-ups to be as specific to what you're preparing for as you personally can, right? So if I was a smaller, more mobile guy like I once was, dynamic warm-ups would look like squats with the bar, more of them. 5 sets with the bar to get moving better and better. And once I'm moving well, I'm warmed up, right? The best warm up you can do is just the motion that you're planning to do with lighter loads. If you have specific issues that you need to address, you got junky ankles, maybe you need to sit in a third world squat for a while. Maybe you need to do some calf raises. It all depends. If you're someone who really struggles to open at the hips, that might look like Cossack squats. That might look like hip swings. If you're someone who really struggles to hinge at the hips, that might look like Kang squats, right? So I can't give you a specific, this is what dynamic squats warm-ups look like, because it does vary from person to person what they're going to need to do. But you want it to look as much like the thing you're preparing to do as you can, while still also addressing the specific things that you need to get done. So I think, hip swings, Kang squats, Cossack squats, and getting your ankles moving are all really solid, simple, dynamic ones. Walking lunges are a really simple, dynamic one. And just trial and erroring, like, okay, I find I don't need to do the Kang squats, but I feel my squat feels like shit if I don't do the Cossacks. Again, it comes down to trial and erroring. Those are just some basic ideas of what it might look like. And also just a generalized warm-up of raising your core body temperature. So just 5 to 10 minutes of steady state cardio just to break a sweat. You'll find when you're physically warmer, your mobility is quite a bit better without having to do all this stretching out or these dynamic stretches. So if I can do 10 minutes of cardio, break a sweat, and then go get under a bar, I would, if I could still do that, right? My shoulder mobility is awful, so I need to spend some time just being able to get a bar on my back. But if you don't need to do that, you don't need to spend an excessive amount of time on that, right? So it's boiling it down to what do you need, but nothing that you don't need.